his. I don't have them all, but
There's a lot of them.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know about that before you told me about it, Craig. But I kind of want to read a couple of those. Okay, I think we're about to go live here. And we're probably live. It's hard to know exactly when you're live, but I think this is probably it. So
one of the guys who
believe me, it's harder to know exactly when you're dead.
Yeah. Anyways, let's talk about superheroes and pop culture philosophy today. Discuss some of the ideas behind pop culture, or at least some interesting conversations we can have based on some of these properties. So, and like we were talking before we went live, we'll do this as a kind of like a free form format. If you think of interesting ideas, you can bring them up. But just to, I have one question that is sort of, I think we should start with that one because it's a little bit more generic, but kind of applies to superheroes, thinking about superheroes and pop culture in general. So the question is, are superheroes the equivalent of American myths in the absence of let's say a homegrown religion or mythology? So can we compare like superheroes and can we say that they're archetypes like the Greek gods or the Norse gods? So maybe that's a good starting point for a discussion to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no question about. Some of them are actually based directly, right? You mean you have Thor, you have Gilgamesh, who's been a character in the superhero comics, Hercules, you name it. They have stolen a lot from the classical mythological stories and then, updated them and modernized them and maybe made them a little sexier for 20th century or so consumption.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean they even use, I mean, Thor has become a major Marvel character, right? That's it's hard to come up with a more explicit way of really saying we're borrowing a lot from these characters, from these mythologies, from this kind of storytelling. What do the rest of you guys think about that?
Yeah, I agree with it. It's cooler to be able to actually see the superhero in a movie so that you can actually visualize it with your own eyes, whereas previously, they just had to talk about it and you just had to sort of guess what that, god would look like, or what, like the Greek god or whatever. But yeah, I think it's absolutely analogous.
Did I hear a tone?
A tone?
What?
Maybe you guys didn't hear it. I don't know why I heard it.
It's the UFOs, David.
The aliens?
It might be my baby in the background, my daughter in the background. No. I don't know. Could be.
I don't know what happened. Okay. Sorry I interrupted.
All right. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, well, a lot of the Greek gods or gods of other religions, it's like they were kind of all powerful, like nothing could stop them. Whereas a superhero is really powerful, but they're still facing a challenge that they have to overcome. So maybe that's one difference.
And the critical thing about a superhero is they all have to have a weakness of some time. Because otherwise it's hard to plot a story with someone who is really totally invincible. So Superman has kryptonite, Green Lantern has the color yellow, or the different Green Lanterns each have a different weakness. But even Thor has his kind of stupidity occasionally, and B, his penchant just to run in and start doing things without thinking them through very carefully.
Yeah, I never do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're obviously not a Norse god then.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, a problem that was sort of a problem with Superman is that he didn't really have a lot of weaknesses, and he was so all powerful, and that has kind of like harmed the character in a way. But then they've started exploiting more the kryptonite issue, which is his biggest weakness, and they brought in like really powerful villains to counteract the fact that he was so powerful. Actually, the main guy in this, because we were talking before we went live as well about this new show, Jupiter's Legacy, which I found was pretty interesting. But this guy in the middle here, he's obviously based on Superman, so he's like the ultimate superhero archetype, like this perfect guy. But it's not just being all powerful. You know, someone like Superman, he's all powerful, but sort of like a Jupiter god, a Thor or an, Odin or Zeus. But he's also perfect, sort of like morally in terms of his ideas, the ideals that he promotes, and he lives accordingly. He kind of like represents these Superman in particular, but all these superheroes, they represent these ideals that people should aspire to. In that way, they really are a little bit like the old gods, except sometimes the gods were kind of wicked in some of those stories. But there's certainly a parallel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of like the role that these pop culture stories play in, I guess, in promoting some sort of morality for society. Also, that's kind of like what I was trying to introduce in the question. If that's the way that we tell those morality tales these days, because perhaps we don't talk so much about religion and mythology as might have been the case in the past.
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, you've got things like Spider-Man with the classic "with great power comes great responsibility," which is actually based on something written by I believe it was a 19th century English bureaucrat. It was the first one to write that down. But I mean, that's a big thing, right? And yeah. Superman, Truth, Justice, and the American Way. I mean, as a World War II vintage, and actually before World War II, but grew big during World War II vintage superhero. I mean, that's exactly what you want to feed the troops, right? Same with Wonder Woman, same with Captain America.
Captain America.
Yeah. They're all basically World War II propaganda, you know, in some respects.
Yeah, they went as far as having Captain America punch Hitler, right? Wasn't that the first issue? That was one of the first issues.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty clear propaganda. I wonder, I guess that I was reading a little bit about the history of comics, and it seems that the Nazis prohibited comics. They banned them. I wonder if that was because it was an American cultural format at the time.
They were in France and in Germany and Britain and stuff like that in the first half of the 20th century too. A lot of them would be considered too racy for the American public because that was European culture in the first few decades of the 20th century, but they certainly had them.
Yeah, but the Germans don't really have a strong tradition, and especially back then. So I wonder. I would have to read a little bit more about it, but I don't know why the Nazis banned them specifically. The same thing happened in fascist Spain, for example. Comics were also banned by Franco, and I don't know again if that's because that was seen as an American cultural product. But Vladimir, did you grow up like reading comics as well? Because you and I, we grew up in other countries, but for me, I mean, comic books were you know growing up in Western Europe, for example, you know, comics were huge, just like they were here. But what about
I,
for you?
I read very little of comics.
Very little.
I basically was playing video games in my childhood and didn't
But
read anything. I read some fairy tales, but after I went to school, like I guess in the beginning of 90s, I stopped like reading and was interested in watching some movies. I also watched lots of movies and TV shows back then, but I guess they had certain impact on my personality, but I guess mostly it was a kind of negative impact. So I never actually.
why was it a negative impact?
No, just because I was behaving like a jerk for many years, especially in my teens, and
But
I never got anything, any kind of inspiration. I mean, in a positive sense from these movies. I basically was watching something, and I like criminals more than than heroes in in these movies and in these TV shows and I try to like probably copy the behavior of criminals rather than those
really,
good guys. So I never liked good guys.
so you wanted to be a supervillain?
Probably, yeah. It's like I don't know. Now it's different, but in my childhood when I was watching all this stuff, it was mostly the case. But it was also appealing to my environment. So nobody wanted to be a good guy. Everybody wanted to be a bad guy.
I think when Black Widow comes out, we're going to have to get a bootleg copy and somehow get it to Vladimir, because I think he will find it pretty amusing to watch. It's a superhero film that's basically set in Russia with Russian heroes and Russian villains in it.
Yeah, I remember this guy from I guess it was Iron Man, the second movie. There was Russian guy, like kind of Russian guy who was a villain there. Yeah,
well, Black Widow was the Russian assassin who worked with the Avengers, and is played by Scarlett Johansson, who is of course not at all Russian, but and doesn't really speak much in terms of Russian, but the other characters in the film, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah, they're often Russians like versus Americans, and Russians mostly villains, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I also identified with villains, since I was identified with with Russians. So this movie, I also, like you reminded me. There was Salt. I know how we watched with Angelina Jolie. It's like they're also like Russian American.
Yeah, I watched a long time ago, so I don't quite remember it.
What could be interesting if you watch that movie is seeing how badly they butcher the accent and whether what they say is actually makes any sense. Because a lot of times it doesn't in the movies. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it really is off the mark. Like somebody just made it up on the set. Oh, these syllables sound Russian.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're a lot better at it these days. Not necessarily Marvel. They're pretty horrible at it. I mean, I feel that like stuff like Netflix, they're kind of like better, like figuring out like different languages and stuff like that. They even have, and this is really cool about Netflix, that they now have shows about other cultures set in other countries in different languages. And that's really nice. Even today, I wanted to like practice my Spanish a little bit. I hadn't done that for a while, like listen to something in a different language. But I watched this really good Spanish show, which is apparently a huge sensation in all over the world, especially in Europe. It's called it's about robbers. Actually, it's about villains. Vladimir, you might like this one. It's about, what's it called? In English, it's Money Heist. Money Heist, and in Spanish is La Casa de Papel, which is a house of paper. I don't know why they changed the title, but in English. But it's really good. It's about it's basically a heist movie, but it's a TV show, and it's set in Spain, in Madrid, and it's actually really good. And they have German shows, Brazilian shows, Italian shows. I don't think they have a lot of Russian shows. Vladimir, you should write a show for Netflix about villains.
I don't watch popular culture like now. Especially in Russia, I mostly watch. I don't watch anything in Russian language. There's just maybe like one movie, few movie a year. No.
There's not a lot though. That's
Oh, there is a lot, but I can't watch it since it make me feel very very sad. I mean,
yeah, it's depressing.
The quality is there. Maybe there are some few TV shows with good quality. I just never searched for them. But what I discover, it's basically something that I don't like to watch since I consider it as a basically waste of time. There's nothing new and characters presented there. They were so dumb that
Well, I agree with you. I haven't found anything interesting in Russian. There is these days. There's a lot of good stuff in German, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, but I haven't found it in Russian.
Yeah, recently I watched few German TV shows. One of them was Barbarians.
Oh, that one is fantastic. That is really good. I love that TV show.
Yeah, and another Tribes of Europe. I guess I already mentioned it here on the podcast.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet.
The last few weeks I've been watching Daria. I don't know how you watched this kind of TV show cartoon Daria.
No,
it's not an American TV show, like the late 90s, the beginning of 2000s.
Okay.
And it's just fantastic. I had lots of pleasure. It's basically like Daria. It's a girl in high school, and she's kind of unpopular. And basically, the whole TV show, it's kind of satire. So Daria is this character which nobody likes her, but she's like honest, ironic, sarcastic, and it's better to watch. I can just tell anything, but it's fascinating. And I was very excited to find this show. It's unpopular. I mean, I never heard about this TV show. Just accidentally watched some YouTube video, and the guy was mentioning it. I was interested. I started watching, and wow, like so exciting. But it's not mythology. It's more just
It's cool. Like, what's it called again?
Daria. DARIA.
Oh yeah, I've never heard of it.
No, it's Beavis and Butthead. Have you heard this?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I used to watch that. Yeah.
She was like one of the characters from this. Like, she was presented as a character there, but they created the whole TV show around her.
Okay.
But it's not like Beavis and Butthead. The Beavis, it's like a black satire, but Daria, it's clever. And like, I said before that I don't like watching some TV shows where there's like dumb characters, and Daria is basically an archetype of very clever and intelligent young girl who's surrounded by stupidity, and and she can't do anything. She basically complains a lot about what's going on, but still she just manages to to live in this environment and not be corrupted by it. So
It's difficult. Going. I was just thinking, going back to like the superhero mythology thing. Superheroes are like a product of the 20th century in terms of fiction. But even before that, it seems that there was this need to, number one, tell stories, and number two, kind of like tell stories that told morality tales of some sort. But that was something that was done with Westerns before in the United States. So it's almost like superheroes have kind of like succeeded Westerns, have been there's been a succession, but people still the same needs are still being fulfilled, right? These needs to tell these stories, these needs to the need to have these heroes, and the need to have these heroes have some sort of code that they live by. So maybe this is just a feature that of society in general, that it needs these kinds of elements and storytelling of some
So
sort.
what they kind of are outgrowths from what you might call medieval romance type things. That is stuff like the Le Morte d'Arthur and the big medieval and early classics of Old English that eventually gave us things like Tolkien and Lewis, and also we get Verne and Wells coming into that genre with kind of bringing science fiction into the mainstream. And that all started happening late 19th century is when that started happening. America still was kind of fixated on the West because that's what we knew, right? In a sense, we were still kind of the colonial hicks in the colonies here, and the more sophisticated Europeans started bringing in things like Sherlock Holmes or well, again, Verne and Wells, whereas America, we were still glorifying gunfighters and things like that. Actually, Vladimir would have probably liked those early Westerns because people really admired the villains a lot in those days. They admired the Jesse James or the Billy the Kids or the classic Western villain was quite a role model.
Westerns had a lot of anti-heroes.
They did. Oh, not even anti-heroes, out and out villains. They weren't even anti-heroes.
Yeah, or the serious spaghetti westerns were good, bad, and what was
Clint Eastwood. Yes, there we go.
Yeah. I remember. I liked them.
They were entertaining.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, I think that's an interesting perspective, right? Because actually yesterday I watched this movie at night while I was having dinner on Disney Plus, and it was an adaptation of Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days or something like that, and just a classic story of Jules Verne, and then I kind of like read about that sort of fiction in a little bit more depth. The Disney movie is terrible, but I could see it was made for kids and stuff. It was with Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan one, yeah,
which is ridiculous, but
yep.
But the story is really good.
Is the David Niven version, which was made in probably in the late 60s or something like that, is probably much better.
I bet, yeah. And to your point, I mean, Jules Verne was all of his adventures, all of his stories were really about showing the world and having all these adventures across the world and highlighting all these inventions that were changing the world at that time. So it was a completely different kind of like worldview than the American fiction centered on gunfighters in the middle of nowhere. I had never thought about it that way.
Yeah, Verne was very much, I think, a utopian author as opposed to Wells, who kind of split and went both ways. Some of his stuff was utopian and some of his stuff was dystopian. And I don't think he ever really made up his mind about how he thought it was going to go. Although I don't think he was overly optimistic in general.
You know, I've sometimes wondered if Wells was trying to mitigate or get people to consider things in order to prevent the worst case scenario, rather than saying this is how it's going to be.
Oh,
It was a warning more so than a prophecy, I think.
Right, stuff like the Island of Dr. Moreau or Food of the Gods or all sorts of interesting things that said, hey, these things could go wrong, make sure they don't. And, I mean, War of the Worlds, on the other hand, yeah, what you don't have a lot of control over that. If you get invaded from another planet, you get invaded from another planet.
Interestingly, H.G. Wells, he tried to promote speculative fiction. That's what it was called at the time, speculative fiction. I don't know when people started calling it science fiction, but he wanted to make his stories as anchored in real science as he could. And it was speculative, but so naturally his imagination reigned, which you want to happen in a story. But in order to stay up on what was happening in science, he had friends who were physicists, and he went to a dinner party, and people stand around and talk at dinner parties, and so he was in a group of physicists that were talking about the work that Marie Curie was doing on radium. And one of the people in that conversation said, what would happen if you could release all that energy at once? And so that idea germinated in H.G. Wells's head. And when he wrote the book, I think it was Things to Come.
Right.
He was the first person to use the phrase atomic bomb. That comes out of fiction, and there was a boy who read that book when he was 10 years old, named Leo Szilard, who grew up to become a physicist. And he realized that they might be able to do the thing that H.G. Wells had speculated about in his book. But he didn't have enough clout to get anybody with enough power to make a decision to meet with him. So, but he did have a friend.
He did, indeed.
Albert Einstein. And Einstein wrote a letter to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt would read a letter from Albert Einstein himself. And so he did, and that created the Manhattan Project, part of which was in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And this was immediately after the Depression. And there was a guy named George Stiles who had been out of work for a long time, and he went all the way to Oak Ridge, Tennessee from Franklin to work. And there was another guy who worked on it, and they went to the same church. And one of them's oldest son was my father. And the other one's oldest daughter is my mother. And so I was literally born in the atomic age.
You're a child of the bomb.
all because H.G. Wells went to a party.
Wow.
Anybody can do that.
That's a remarkable story, David.
Sorry, it was a long story.
No, I love
But a
it.
good
I
one.
mean, that's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about speculative fiction, I love the term as well. I didn't know it was called that. Maybe we can talk, and this is actually, I want to bring this one up, Craig, before we do any of the other ones, also because that's something you brought up the other day. So I thought let's discuss, because you brought up Minority Report.
Oh, right.
And
Right. Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting, I love that movie, and it's it's also a short story. but it presents a very interesting question, right? It's one of the cool thing about science fiction short stories is that usually it's centered around a very interesting question. In this case, maybe we can discuss that question a little bit. It kind of also can be seen as either a utopia or a dystopia, depending on how you answer the question. If
Not for me, but I only see it one way.
well, yes, but that's to my point, right? It depends on how you answer the question. The question is really if it can be justified to imprison criminals before they actually commit the crime. But they're going to commit the crime. That's the premise. The system is almost flawless, right?
No, it's not.
Well, I mean, the story
Report.
then shows that in fact it's not completely flawless,
right.
but it's presented as flawless. And it's also presented to us that crime has almost completely been eradicated.
Actually, in a way, Minority Report told us what the flaw was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which was
the characters may have believed, some of the characters may have believed that their system of devising who would commit a crime was flawless. But in the story, you learn that it's not flawless.
Okay, yeah.
Not only is it not flawless, but it's manipulated by one of the people on the inside to make it appear flawless so he can keep his job, basically. It's the same bill of goods that we all get sold these days about the promise of artificial intelligence. It's exactly the same bill of goods that these algorithms and computations are going to be correct, and they're going to figure out things so much better than humans can. And a lot of people buy that a lot and don't think about it.
I do. I buy it.
And see, I don't, because I've worked in the field enough to understand that. Well, you would be better off. Well, I wouldn't say you would be better off because that's not true, but you might be equally well off tossing a bucket of dice and reading that, or I'm not going to say like reading the entrails of birds, because it's not quite at that level, but some of it is not that much better. And still requires a lot of human management,
In my view, humanity is building and improving and machines.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
Another tool.
And in my view, we also are machines.
Mm-hmm.
Just atoms in there. And we're going to figure that out.
Atoms plus information. That's where I come from, is I think we're atoms plus information, which I suppose you could say is a form of Cartesian dualism, but I don't think so. But you could, if you said that, I guess I wouldn't spit on you for it, but
For the time being, though, we're carbon-based, whereas most machines are silicon-based. So that's the pretty big qualitative difference, at least at this point in history. Now, maybe in the future, we'll be able to come out with a carbon-based machine, but yeah.
Well, the one of the points that I tried to make last week about when a guy is talking to his mother on the phone and she repeats it to her husband at the other end of the couch, all the different media that message information went through. So to me, the information is substrate independent. It doesn't matter if it's a wave of light or sound or electricity or what, in other words, what the information passes through is substrate independent. So in other words, in the same way, it may be possible that what we think of as consciousness, if anybody has a definition for that, I hereby bestow upon you a Nobel Prize. But
everybody has a definition of it. They're
Yeah.
all just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I think of as my consciousness is actually a pattern. And it too, to my thinking, is substrate independent. It doesn't matter if it's in cells and tissue or in electronics. If it does the same thing,
But it's a
accomplishes-
constantly evolving pattern, and that's the interesting part about it is when you think of patterns, you think like of crystals, you think of things which are static. And
Well,
we're very dynamic. Our patterns are very dynamic.
I'm just thinking about the things that make us dynamic.
Sure. I think we're driving Bruno a little crazy here by going off topic. but-
Sorry.
Oh, no. I mean, there's no off topic. I mean, that's an interesting question, you know. In fact, that actually it doesn't remind me. I mean, it's the question that they're trying to answer in some of these science fiction movies and books, you know, like Blade Runner. That's basically what Blade Runner is about, right? I mean, it's who's a human, who is not. And I mean, without any spoilers, I mean, we are left in a state of uncertainty, right? In terms of there's no answer really that
That movie's
the
almost 40
book or
years
the movie
old.
provides.
That movie's almost 40 years old. There's no danger of spoilers.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. I think it would be fair to
Harrison
spoil
Ford
it.
is one of them. That's what-
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know,
bizarre
maybe-
because Harrison
Vladimir,
Ford
have you
keeps saying,
seen Blade Runner?
Blade
Sorry?
Runner, yeah, I've seen, but I don't remember. Like a long time ago. I'd like to bring up this the Westworld TV show. I guess
That's
it's relevant.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
which Vladimir, I think, just so you know, Blade Runner like presents pretty much the same problems as Westworld. So I think that's it's, if you've seen that, yeah, that's great.
Then
Keep
this idea
going,
of,
Vladimir. Yeah. Keep going.
this idea of consciousness, that it's like, is it human or is it like what's the word? Anyway, so like everything has consciousness, or it's just our unique way of perceiving the world. And
The
for me,
big word they use for that is panpsychism.
yeah,
Panpsychism is
right.
everything is conscious.
That's what I want
Yeah.
to say. Yeah, for me it makes sense. Like we can't know really, but it seems that this idea of panpsychism, it's more like, at least in how I feel, it makes more sense than just we can have something like consciousness, and other species and living forms, they don't have it. And in movies like in the Westworld, like this big question, like what is consciousness? Can robots have consciousness? And how suffering, for example, determines whether or not you are like pain, suffering. It's like, does consciousness grow out of like this experience, this suffering, or it's like how did it evolve, and what's the purpose of consciousness? Is it just to see and observe the world, like perceive it, or it's like some kind of control over the world? And by the way, as you know, I don't believe in free will. So for me, like consciousness, basically, it's more like some tool of perceiving the world and describing it, rather than some mechanism of control. And it's hard topic. I see now. I can't say something.
Let's. I think that this is an interesting question to discuss a little bit. But what's your opinion, Vladimir? Because you're presenting like the question, right? But just so we know your opinion, what do you think about that?
Yeah,
is it possible to have a consciousness that is not human? Because that's really what the show is asking.
Yeah, exactly. I'm saying that like panpsychism is for me, I think it's a kind of real thing. I mean, everything, even like small atoms and the small parts of the universe may have their own consciousness, and they all, like, everything may perceive the world through some, like even in my body, like every cell may possess certain quality like consciousness, and may view the world on its own way, and there's no way to really say what is it and how it works. Like it looks for me that what I see around and how I can perceive the world is just unique way. I can say that even all of you have consciousness in this way. So it's like, according to biology, I may assume that everybody has consciousness, but it seems like, as I feel, there's only one like person in the universe who is conscious, and it's me. And in panpsychism, it's like you basically reverse this idea. So you say like everything has consciousness, not just humans, but everything. Yeah, and I believe that it's kind of it makes sense for me.
Yeah, panpsychism makes a lot of sense to me. Like, why would we think that only certain things would have consciousness and other things wouldn't? Like, to me, I feel like maybe even a rock has consciousness, just like a very, very tiny amount of it. But like,
it's just different, right? So it's not the same. It doesn't have the same consciousness as you have, but still, it may certainly possess certain, like, this quality. It may consider its own experience on a subatomic level, and there are some patterns in in it, and why not?
yeah, like a rock, it might just have like a really, like a trace. Maybe humans have the most consciousness of any creatures, but maybe everything is consciousness, just a minuscule amount. That's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the problem is, again, how you define it. That there's a big philosophical question. What is consciousness? Nobody knows exactly. We may have a conversation about it for hours, and still it seems that we are talking about different things, and everybody think, oh, this is like what I believe is consciousness. But
So
yeah,
what I'm wondering, and maybe you guys can help me out, in at least for human beings, to the best of my knowledge, anytime we feel something or think something, generally, I personally think that there are neurons and brain cells involved in that. And they communicate with each other through electrical chemical impulses of various kinds. So I guess what I don't know is, where does that happen in a rock?
well, on a subatomic level, like there are quarks and all these particles, which actually they communicate in the same way as neurons.
So
We just don't see it.
do you know of a study that shows that demonstrates that? I
Study
don't.
like they communicate. No. It's like the whole. Well, do you? It's a hard question, since you can't say what's going on. There's certain movement. So it's on a subatomic level, everything is moving. It's not static, and there are certain patterns in this movement. So if you look at the atom, it's like it has certain patterns, and it always dynamic. And you can say that it's just you may say it's automatic, and it's just like the movement of planets, but it's not the case. It's like in damn it, I can't say it.
What study shows that a human has consciousness? Because like you could observe a human brain, and you could see all these neurons moving around. And if you look at a rock and you got a microscope, you could see all these atoms and quarks moving around. But how do you know?
Yeah, since you are a human, right? That's the whole idea. And you have it. You have consciousness, but you are not a rock. If you were a rock, you probably would say, "Look, I'm like, I don't know, human probably don't have consciousness. Only we rocks have it, and consciousness means like this our whatever perception, how we perceive the world."
Well, there are certainly some differences, like if I punch you, Vladimir, you would probably feel it and be hurt, If I punch a rock, well, I'm gonna probably be hurt, but the rock is not gonna really feel anything, and that alone, I mean, that is a difference, that is a considerable difference, that the fact that Vladimir feels pain and rock does not feel pain.
Yeah, but you still may destroy rock, right?
Well, I'm not Superman, so probably not. But
even the rock doesn't feel pain. Maybe it feels a really minuscule amount of pain, just not the amount of pain that we feel.
The rock?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I don't think the rock feels pain.
But if a rock looked at human beings, they might think we're just like, yeah. I guess I feel like it's hard to definitively know either way, I guess. But yeah.
Well,
and in you, Bruno, like again, what we are talking about, what feels pain exactly?
Yeah, what does it mean to feel pain? I guess like we have our understanding of what it means to feel pain, right? Like we have a heart, and when someone punches us, our heart speeds up, and we can feel our blood, moving, and our brain is going like this. But so that's our experience of pain. But maybe objects have different ways of manifesting it. Maybe that's just a human way of manifesting pain.
Yeah, and it's also on a physical level. It's like your consciousness doesn't feel pain. What feels pain is your body, but your consciousness basically doesn't care. It's just an experience. You just perceive things. So you may separate your feeling pain and being aware of feeling pain. And this being aware of feeling pain is like, it's not the same as feeling pain. And whether or not you're aware that there's like the next level, like on a rock level, there's also maybe like
okay, just so I understand, are you saying that consciousness is separate from the brain?
I don't know. Like it depends.
I don't know that either.
It looks as if like whatever I experience is produced by these neurons and connections between them. But if you start asking like philosophical questions, like where like again the brain, okay, it's in the brain, right? Where is the brain? And is there something outside of the brain?
So we're getting kind of close to making what's called a category mistake here. And where I point that out is that the brain is a thing and consciousness are processes. And we don't want to necessarily conflate the thing. We don't necessarily want to conflate the hardware and the software is
okay,
kind of my shorthand description of it.
Separate them for me. I mean, in what medium does consciousness exist?
In what medium does software exist?
Yeah, that's a good question.
In what medium does music exist? In what medium does all sorts of things exist?
I'm not asking about those things. I'm asking about consciousness.
I guess I'm trying to make analogies.
You're saying it's
here.
just as untouchable as those things? Is that what you're saying?
Based on our success on trying to pin it down so far, yeah. I mean, I don't see it's part of the we're inside the system trying to define the parameters of the system, and it's too complicated for us to figure out in some respects. And in that way, you see, I have problems with panpsychism. I have but I'm also willing to accept the notion that if one considers the entire universe as the totality of everything, and one wants to say that that is conscious, okay, if you want to say that, I'm okay with that. I can't, I wouldn't know how to know, and I wouldn't know how to figure out how to know, much like with the question of God, which is why I'm an agnostic, is that I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't know how to get the answer to that question. So the pragmatist in me says, well, okay, think of something that, works and that you can use in your day-to-day conversation with life to help yourself move forward.
Yeah, I
Which
guess
confuses your question, I'm sure, a whole hell of a lot there.
yeah, I guess we can add to that the question, like whether like what you call consciousness, you basically perceive it as like yourself. So there's a similarity between the self and consciousness. And it seems that when you are dead, consciousness is still here, and the self is no longer here. And from that point,
And
like
just so I understand, where is here?
like, well, here it still perceives things. I mean, I can say with 100% of certainty that before my, birth, there was something here, and I can say that not like something is going to be after my death, but still, it looks as if, like you, for example, have consciousness, and if I die, consciousness still is going to be like maintained. Like put forward by other people, and if you consider yourself as an individual, like me, this person, it's one way of looking at this problem. And you may also consider yourself as consciousness. It's like this universal consciousness. So you may say like me is just a thing which like this universal consciousness controls, and not controls, maybe just through which universal consciousness perceives itself and the world, etc. But the whole idea is like when I'm dead, it's like this is just the death of my body, but consciousness itself still exists, and I may identify myself with this like universal consciousness instead of identifying myself with an individual. And then I'm kind of immortal, since I basically
I'm sorry. No, what you're describing now is something that they call the Akashic field. And what the Akashic field is supposedly is the historical record of everybody's thoughts of all time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like sounds like kind of what you're describing.
Yeah, and also
we consider that to be a pretty far out there.
I'm listening to this conversation with my hand over the woo-woo button.
It's basically like what in this case, what is called consciousness is just language. So that language was there and is going to be there after you die, and you may again perceive yourself not as a like individual, but as the evolution of this like of language, and you are like more language than you are like a physical body.
Sure. I mean, I tell people that I speak with the dead, and they look at me funny, and I say, I'm not saying that I'm a medium. I'm saying I read things like Plato.
Yeah.
Right. And that, in a sense, is speaking with history. In a sense, is speaking with the dead.
And it's like you basically speak with
the dead speaking to you.
It is, yes. Although sometimes I do find myself saying things back to them.
And
yeah, but it's basically you speaking to
Antelope cannot do that.
From this point,
they do not have the benefit of the knowledge of their ancestors in a non-genetic form.
I don't know if that's true or not.
Thousands of years ago. They just don't have that.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
It's only if you perceive time in this linear, whatever, in a linear way. But how do you know that it's linear? So you may perceive like you. In this sense of communication with Plato, you may just basically, it's like you're talking to yourself if you're considering yourself this universal consciousness. So it's like there's a communication between Plato and Crack, and the consciousness is just it's just perception of reality.
I don't know though, but I mean, what Plato had to say affects my thinking, and therefore I would say affects my information processing, and therefore my consciousness.
Yeah, and
So
play, and,
they
and
do
play,
have an impact.
And if you guys figure out why there's a direction of the flow of time, there's another Nobel Prize waiting for you.
Mhm. It turns out with philosophy, right? Many of the deep questions of philosophy all really turn out to be the same question when you dig deep enough into them.
yeah, and like what you say, Crack, about Plato and his some thoughts which affect you. You may also like ask this question. Let's suppose that Plato had certain thoughts, and he also, like as we know, he was a human. He had certain perceptions, and if you have the same thoughts and almost the same perceptions, which is quite possible, like what's the difference between, like in this case, between you and Plato? Like you may like. I'm not saying
I
that
actually don't think that's true. I don't think we can have exactly the same thoughts.
Not exactly, but it may be the similar experience, the similar, like let's suppose I'm thinking
But
about
similar, similar and the same are not.
Let's suppose
Similar
I'm
and the
thinking.
same are not the same.
Let's suppose I'm thinking about a triangle, and you are thinking about a triangle, and at the same time, it's like our consciousness is just a perception of triangle, and we experience the same thing when we like maybe we experience a little bit in a different way, but essentially it's like it's one and the same thing. And I was like studying some Western religions like Buddhism, for example. Buddha is somebody who just sits and experience certain like certain things, and if you like do the same, just sitting and thinking about one thing, you're basically at the same time you just you are Buddha. And
well, I think, but Vladimir, I think there are two different things there. One thing is for you to perceive the same thing as another person or another thing, to experience the same thing. Another thing, which is very different, is for you and that other person or that other thing to be the same entity. Those are not equivalent, right? If you experience the same thing, it does not mean you are the same entity. Like we for example, if Michael and I, we go to the cinema to watch a movie and we watch the exact same movie, me and Michael are not going to merge into the same entity because we're experiencing the exact same thing at one given time. So you can experience the same thing, but that doesn't mean you're the same entity.
Yeah, of course you interpret the movie in a different way, right? Michael will consider it from one point, you'll consider it from another, but it's like it's only if you draw this distinction between individual and universal consciousness. And we before discussed this universal consciousness, and from this point, like you, me, Michael, Crack, Plato, it's like one and the same thing, which universal consciousness manifests itself through. And if you transcend your identity to this thing, and you don't think like an individual. I'm not saying that we're all like the same thing. I'm like, as individuals, we're all in the same thing as this universal consciousness, which from this point of panpsychism is like everywhere. So the difference is like,
well, it's almost like you're describing the Force in Star Wars.
The midichlorians.
Yeah.
To bring up another pop culture idea, that's you have different Jedis though, and different people in Star Wars, right? But they all experience the same, the same Force. But so yeah, there's no disagreeing or agreeing with that, right? It's just because people experience the same universal consciousness, it doesn't mean that we can really say that a person and a rock have the same properties, which is it seems what you're saying.
Honestly, they have the same properties. It's like consciousness, like consciousness, and I guess for me it's like the world and consciousness. They are kind of synonyms, since I don't divide the world on subject and object, and for me, it's like basically one and the same thing. The point is that when I perceive it, now I'm aware that I have different perceptions even in this conversation. Like I look at it from a different point than all of you guys. But at the same time, like if I think about myself as a universal consciousness, I basically like this is just a part me and the whole my experience is just a part of this whole universal consciousness of this whole thing. And I'm definitely aware that, for example, if I talk about let's say mythology and the philosophy and pop culture alone, I would say something different, and I will perceive it like I'll conceptualize it in a different way rather than when I have a conversation with you. So in this case, like what am I saying right now? It differs from my personal perceptions and my personal way of looking at things. And when we have a conversation, it changes my personality, it changes my like the way how I speak, and it changes the way how I think. I can predict what I'm going to say next, or how would I interpret some question. And it's certainly different from the way how I would do that alone or doing it with you. And then I may say that this universal consciousness, when we have a conversation, it affects my perception. And basically there's like, I am like an individual, it's just a part of what's here. And there's also another part which I can perceive, which I can say whether or not it's here or not, but still, which affects strongly the way how I think and the way how I perceive the world and what's going on in the world. Wow. Doesn't make any sense.
Well,
I kind of follow what you're saying and agree with portions of it. But as far as like the consciousness of a rock to be considered, I think, I don't think any of you were there, but back when we were doing the old Drunken Philosophy group, Quan and Frank had a debate on whether or not rocks could have consciousness. And I remember participating in that and bringing up the point, especially relevant right now, is I'm assuming that there are 4 human beings on the other end of this conversation, but all I'm really seeing is stuff that's projected to me on a screen that is largely made out, and stuff that's largely made out of silicates. Therefore, in a sense, rocks are talking to me right now, and I'm talking back to the rocks, and we're having a conversation. And if that doesn't freak your mind out, then you need to start taking better drugs or something like that. But in essence, rocks can be imbued with consciousness through the miracle of electronics.
Now, I wouldn't say that you talking to Zoom is like an example of an inanimate object having a consciousness. I would say that object is provoking certain thoughts. So the stuff you're seeing on the screen is provoking thoughts in you.
But that means it's part of my consciousness. If it's provoking thoughts in me, it is an information source coming into one of the many information sinks inside my head, and causing changes of state of some kind or another. And that's my reaction to you, whether that be intellectually or emotionally or whatever. Those are changes of state that are being induced in my body by talking to these people that I'm seeing on rocks.
If I were to say to you that there's a unicorn on my street, that is a claim about reality. And I would imagine, knowing all of you, that you would require evidence for that. And so, in my opinion, saying that a rock is conscious is also a claim about reality. And what I'm not seeing is what the evidence is for that.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. The evidence, I mean, the evidence that humans have consciousness is really just what we ourselves feel. Like for me, Michael Greenberg, the only evidence that any of you have a consciousness is that I feel like I have a consciousness, right? I
We
mean,
really are a brain in a vat.
right. I mean
This
that's
is the
the only
vat.
that's the only evidence I have that you guys have a consciousness, right?
I'm pretty sure
there's
some
no-
days I'm a brain in a canopic jar, but okay.
So I feel like I have a consciousness. It just feels that way to me. You guys seem similar to me, similar enough. So therefore, I'm inferring you guys probably also do. But that's the extent of my evidence. I don't really have scientific evidence, I would say, right?
To some extent, I still, consciousness is still something of a human conceit, I think. And even Sagan, who we frequently refer back to, talked a lot about what he called human chauvinism. And he, I think, was talking about us with respect to things like dolphins and other animals that react and behave very much as if they were intelligent and conscious. And
I think dolphins are very intelligent, but I don't think dolphins are going to build rockets to go to Mars or predict eclipses for thousands of years in advance. And maybe they're developing in the early stages of developing the ability to do that. But by the time they can do that, I don't think we'll call them dolphins anymore.
yeah, they also probably aren't, likely to blow the crap out of themselves with nuclear weapons either. So in the end, who's the smart one?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. What is, like, this goes into what is intelligence? So if intelligence is the ability to control your environment, then to control and manipulate your environment, then humans by far are the most intelligent species. We can build rockets that go to the moon. We can, build cars, all this stuff. But if intelligence is kind of like a measure of electrical activity in your brain, then multiple animals would be human. Like, I'm sure.
Or
Yeah.
But intelligence is an evolutionary adaptation to an environment. It isn't necessarily about controlling the environment, although that is a handy and useful side effect, to be sure. But intelligence is really more about adaptation, I think, than control. And again, I think that's kind of a human conceit to think that we actually are in control of our environment or a whole lot of other things that we like to think that we're in control of and actually aren't.
I think we're also honestly we're having like a real severe problem here with semantics. I'm not really sure we're talking about the same thing. I think
We're definitely not talking about superheroes.
Well, we're not
Sorry.
talking about superheroes, but I'm not really sure what we're talking about in terms of conscious. I don't think we really. I think we're talking about different things because for me. I think we would have to define what consciousness is, at least to a certain extent, because if we're really saying that a rock has consciousness, that to start with, for example, from my perspective, that's not, remotely even close to what could be described as consciousness, because so I think the first step would, and I think we would need more time. We would kind of need to go
A few thousand years, probably, yeah.
Well, maybe not that long, also because we don't live that long. But
this discussion's been going on for a long, long time.
But
Aristotle.
But we would need some parameters, and maybe this is a discussion that we can just talk about consciousness, and we're going to have to need to use the 2 hours because we need to. I think we really need to start with what are the parameters, right? Because for just as an example, I think having some sort of will, personal will, own will, to me, that's essential for even be considered conscious. So, but maybe I'm wrong. And it doesn't seem that you guys think that that's a requirement.
Well,
but this is why I'm saying that the semantics thing is an issue in that kind of discussion. It's not that I'm wrong or you're wrong. It's just that we're essentially talking about different things.
For my nickel, consciousness and life are almost synonymous terms. That is, if you, and which is just right, pushing back the definition one more level to what is life. But if something is alive, it has some degree of consciousness. Obviously, not everything has the same degree of consciousness.
Now the
And
question is, what is life?
Yeah, what
is life?
Like,
Exactly. Erwin Schrödinger's question, and we're still working on trying to figure that one out too. Again, they're all the
Yeah.
same question ultimately.
Have you seen my cat?
Your
Have you
what?
seen my cat?
No, referring to the rock, it's a part of the system, and if it's a part of the system, it's somehow like it
Well,
may be
but
like
then
if you consider life as everything, it's a part of life, and
But then it's a semantics discussion as well, because then
Yeah,
you were talking
yeah.
about different things again. You know, if you're talking about life as we perceive life and we usually talk about life, then a rock is not alive. It's that simple. But
I
then
know that. Maybe it's
no, you do know
way of
that
being
because
alive.
that's
Bruno is
No,
not
you
making
you
a
know
claim
that
about
only if
reality.
you know
are,
that
Michael.
only if you give
No,
definition.
no, I'm claiming. Sorry, I'm not claiming that a rock is alive. I'm just saying I don't know. I'm saying
no, but
have
I know that the rock is not alive. That's
you
what I'm
know that it's
saying.
not alive.
No, because
Yes,
you
100%.
right, but you
Because
give a life a certain definition, right? You say life
well,
is
yes,
this,
that's what
right?
I'm saying.
So it's not a rock, and we may agree on that, but you can't agree on that if you, for example, looking at it from a kind of metaphysical perspective. If you take the whole universe as one thing and say that this thing is like alive in itself, and you don't know exactly how it perceives itself and how it views itself outside of your personal perception. And again, in questions of will, so you said that will is necessary for having consciousness. So will, personal will, and consciousness are the same thing.
No, not the same thing. It's one of the
Okay,
requirements.
yeah, sure, but
Yeah.
I, for example, I disagree here. So I can say that I think that what you call personal will is just an illusion, and the rock may have the same personal will as well, but it's just perceive itself as if it has will. For example, when you throw it, it may think that I am flying and I am doing it on my own, on my own will. This is my way of doing it.
Well, I think that's quite a stretch. I mean,
And the interesting thing with that is to contrast it with Daniel Dennett, who is exactly the opposite. He would say free will exists, but consciousness is an illusion.
Mhm.
That's often Dennett's position. So, and
there is such a thing as will. It's again, you can go down to like the issue of semantics, and I think we are doing that again here. But like when I say will, I am not really talking about a metaphysical thing. I'm talking about a very concrete thing, like, for example, say going back a little bit to Westworld and Blade Runner, which essentially they're doing the same thing in terms of intellectually, right? They're presenting a story that makes us think, well, is a machine a human, or is not a human, but
does it have its own will?
Does the machine have some sort of human qualities that makes it worthy of being considered sort of on the same level, right? Have the same rights. So my computer right now that I'm using does not have will. I mean, I can say that 100% with 100% certainty. In my view of like what will is, like in the way that I'm using this word, this computer doesn't have will. It doesn't want anything. If I throw it out of the window, which I will not, because this is like my second time using it. But if I really wanted to, the computer wouldn't complain. Now, the machine in Westworld will complain. And in fact, that's the whole point of the story, right? Is that the machine feels wronged by the humans because the machine has, in fact, a will. It does not want to be mistreated. It does not want to be thrown out of the window. So without any possible doubt, the machine in that case is different from the machine in this case, because one machine actually wants things and this machine doesn't want anything. This
Well,
is the way I'm using the word.
there's-
Now you can say, let's
Yeah.
use the word in a different way. But if you use the word in the way that I'm saying, there's really no dispute there.
I don't think consciousness is about having desires. I think it's more about being like aware, yeah, like I don't think consciousness is about pain or pleasure, although maybe that it's related to that. But I don't think it's about having a desire for something either. I think it's just about like being self-aware. So like you could imagine, let's take a cat. Like a cat has desires, but let's say, I don't know, let's say a cat is just staring out into space and for the moment isn't like thinking about what they desire, what they want, anything. The cat just literally staring out into
But you
space.
said so yourself. A cat has desires. There can be no question about that. You know what has
Yeah.
desires or not, right?
Yeah, but you could imagine, in your mind, like something just staring out into space, but not really wanting or needing or.
Well, it wouldn't be a cat.
It wouldn't be a cat, okay, but you could imagine a thought experiment where there is something that's just staring into space, but doesn't desire or want anything, right?
Maybe if it's a Buddha cat.
A Buddha cat, yeah. Like that's kind of what I see as consciousness, just that awareness. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but yeah, just feeling like you're existing, I guess. I don't know.
You know, these perspectives are all very enlightening. I read a lot about consciousness, and oftentimes you will hear neuroscientists or scientists or biologists describe consciousness as an emergent property. And one of the examples that is frequently used is that the property may not be understood at the rudimentary level. For example, there is a molecule, H2O, and one molecule of H2O is not wet.
Is that what?
It's not wet.
With?
Wet.
Wet.
W-E-E-T.
Oh, okay, wet. Yeah.
Wetness is a property that emerges as molecules accumulate.
Yeah.
So oftentimes you will hear neuroscientists describe consciousness as an emergent property, like wetness is to an H2O molecule.
Hmm.
But I don't describe it that way. I describe it more to myself, and this is not definitive, this is just my current thinking, that consciousness is more of an emergent faculty, a faculty like vision or hearing. Our ears don't make the sound, they perceive it. Our eyes don't make light, they perceive it. And I guess you could say our brains don't make thoughts, but they do. That's what's different about consciousness, is there's a part of our brain that has developed an awareness of at least the results of the processes that are all going on to some extent, not all of them. And we don't know all the details about which neuron fires and why it does what it does. But to me, consciousness is a faculty because we have reserved a portion of our brain to develop an understanding of what's going on in our brain. The visual stimuli, the auditory.
But you could say that that's just a very sophisticated chemical reaction, right? So everything going on in your brain is, you could think of it as just a bunch of a chemical reaction. So it's just a very sophisticated reaction. Whereas for
I guess what I'm going back to what I was talking about earlier is I think I understand what you're saying. What I don't understand is what evidence you have for that.
I don't know that it's true or not true. I don't know either way. So I'm not staking a claim in the ground. Yeah. I'm saying we just have no clue. Yeah.
David, you said that like your brain makes thoughts and your ears and your eyes, you don't make sounds, you don't make whatever you see, it's like you perceive it. But would you say that what you perceive, it's like kind of real and it's objective, or it's like for everyone, like if we look at any, like, let's say, this cup, so we may look at it and we may say this is objective thing, so we perceive it, and this is the same thing for you, for me, and for everybody else. Or like it's more kind of you interpret what you perceive this cup with your senses, so somehow your brain views it as kind of, for me, for example, it's more like an ideal. So if I'm looking at the world from my own from my kind of personal view, and I don't see exactly what you see. Even if I look at the same cup, I see it like I kind of, by looking at it, I create it with my own perceptions. And you may create a different cup, but it doesn't mean that it will have the same form, it will have the same probably properties, but it probably will have certain different meaning for you and for me. And from this point, like what you perceive, like the whole world outside, you can't say that this is like one and the same thing for everybody else. And then it's very hard to determine whether you are really making, like you said, when you hear the sound, you don't make it, but to some degree you make it, since you interpret it, and your interpretation makes it different from if somebody else hears the same and interprets in a different way.
I think you're exactly right.
What?
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, but you say, and the thoughts, like, are you I don't know what kind of
Are you suggesting that I said something that
no, I'm
contrary
talking
to
like,
that? I don't think I did.
I wanna just put forward this conversation about like whether or not you make thoughts, like what you call you, this or the self. Like for me, it's kind of clear that what I'm thinking right now, for example, it's just a process, and I am aware that there is no entity behind this process, which is like which makes the thoughts. I know it's like, for me, it's basically like a stream of consciousness. It just goes, and I just verbalize this process, trying to make sense of my of my perception of my experience. But I don't know what I'm going to say next. Like if I continue talking for next minute, if there was the self which made these thoughts, this probably should be like, I should know what I'm going to say next and how it's going to be developed. But I actually don't know, and I'm not sure about like whether or not there's certain thing which makes these thoughts. It feels more like I just perceive things and I interpreted them simultaneously. But
wait a minute, but you're the determinist.
Yeah.
I'm confused now.
Yeah, I want to say like the way I
Go.
see my own views, I would say like the difference that I see between me and a lot of the woo-woo people, like astrologers or horoscopes or whatever, is that I claim that I have no clue. Like astrologers say that they know their thing is correct, and they actually base their life on that. Whereas my theory, I'm saying I have no clue. And even if I did know it was true, I don't think it would affect the way I live my life in any way. It's purely philosophical in my mind. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it. But yeah.
If you guys don't mind, maybe we can move on to kind of a different topic, because we haven't really covered that many, and it would be interesting to talk at least about like one more, I think, and this is one that kind of like goes with what you guys are saying as well, but let's change it up a little bit. The Matrix, right? Is ignorance bliss? That's one of the best lines in cinema. When Cypher, I don't know, have you guys seen the Matrix? But basically, yeah, everybody has seen the Matrix, and Cypher's eating the steak, and he says that ignorance is bliss. He doesn't really want to know about the real world, because the real world sucks. So he doesn't really want to know about it or live in it. He wants to go to the pretend world again, where he's going to have a good life and actually be happy. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that concept of sometimes the reality of things is not that desirable. It's better to pretend or to understand things that are not true, or to not understand things that are true.
Yeah, so this is an interesting, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think the important part is realizing that what you understand is probably not true. I'm okay with that. I don't think I can ever actually perceive reality. I think I might get little bits and pieces and occasionally, a little glimpse of something, but I don't think I can ever perceive reality. And I'm okay with that. I just realize that I'm not going to actually be able to perceive reality, but I'm going to do the best I can with what I got.
Well, you'll probably be able to perceive it, but you won't be able to interpret it in a way which, like the...
No, I won't even be able to perceive it because I know I can't, I'm limited by my senses, right? I don't actually see infrared and ultraviolet light. I can't see X-rays. I can make machines that can help me see those things, but I can't see them directly.
Yeah, but what you
And-
see, do you call it real?
Do I call which real?
What, like your perception, your experience, or it's just like just an illusion? Like
I would call them,
imagine.
maybe we'll call them real with a lowercase r, but I probably
Mhm.
would not
You
call
know-
them real with a capital R.
Can you guys join together infrared and perception? I'm not getting that.
What do you mean?
Reality. Well, in other words, I think you're talking about two different things.
Well, I think, and I would say, well, this is a little bit different than is ignorance bliss, but it's also the Matrix, right? And it's Plato as well. It's that we see things, but it's not really reality. It's a reflection of reality of some sort. We're all in the cave still. And it's the same idea that they use in the Matrix. We're in the Matrix, we're not really seeing the real world as it is. It's more like an impression. But it's a little bit different than completely seeing something that is not there altogether, that is simply the opposite of what reality is.
I'm in Flatland, and I know I'm in Flatland, and I understand that there may be things outside of Flatland that will look very strange when I see them in Flatland, but they exist in entirely other ways. And so I'm constrained by this 3 odd dimensional space that I've evolved to be able to see, and by the wavelengths of light and the wavelengths of sound and the chemical receptor. I mean, I'm constrained by my senses, and I can't necessarily perceive too much more about reality than is either directly available to my senses, or I can build some kind of machine to filter and translate and basically frequency shift things into my senses.
Yeah, but I guess it's relevant to ask if you would be able to get beyond this third dimensional model of reality. Would you go, or you'll stay and still perceive reality as you perceive it right now, just because?
Hey, why not? I'd say give it a shot if I can, but
Yeah, but it may be ugly, and it may be very harsh. I mean, this is the question of whether or not you are, bliss ignorance, or just to see what's going on.
That's a question of aesthetics, not of epistemology. Come on.
Okay, it's not ugly, but it's very bad, and you wouldn't probably like it if you go. So it's in flatland, everything is cool. You may perceive things. It's like it's relatively good, but in this third dimensional, fourth dimensional, whatever dimensional world,
Mhm.
it's worse. But it's truth. and well, it's not truth with capital T. It's just, you know, it's different way of looking at things, and it's a more it's like more real. Let's say it's like
More
um,
real.
more real,
More real.
or just different
Hmm.
dimension. Yeah, I would
That's
put.
an interesting ordinal.
Not like me, I'm less real.
Yeah,
Well,
and if you go in the another question, if you go out, like if you become this, if you become aware of Matrix, would you like to go back, or would you stay there? And
If I
is
become
there
aware
is
of
there any is there any way to
Ah.
go back? Like in Plato's cave, we know that there's no way. If you have seen the sun, there's no way to get back and just live as you lived before.
and it's like that in the Matrix as well. That's why he has to betray everybody and you know, backstab his liberators, is because there is no option to go back, you know. So and in real life probably there is no option either.
how can you send them back to the farm once they've seen Perry? Yeah, I get it's all basically the same analogy. I mean, if I got there and I actually saw that kind of a larger world, the first thing is I would probably go insane. So it would turn out more like a Lovecraft novel than anything else, because I don't know that my feeble human mind could deal with it. But if I could for a while deal with it, hey, yeah, I mean, I've studied enough math to know I try to make patterns out of what I saw and try to make some kind of sense out of it.
Let's maybe think about it in a little bit more as an analogy. You know, think about essentially, does knowing too much about the world and about ourselves, about reality, does that make it difficult to achieve happiness? You know, or is it just easier? So it's kind of like what the red pill is, right? You're like, if you use the analogy, you're getting this information about the world, about yourself, about reality, and it's powerful information, but it might make you less happy, because then you're gonna be aware of all these situations, and it's better to be the idiot. You know, the idiot doesn't really know the complexities, and he doesn't really know the ugly truth about things, so he can just live his merry life that is uncomplicated.
Yeah, I think they mixed things up in Matrix. So when there's a conversation between Neo and Morpheus, and basically Morpheus asks Neo, like, do you like to, like, do you believe in fate? And Neo says, no, I don't believe in fate. I don't like when there's like somebody controls me. And Morpheus says, like, I know exactly what you feel. Like, and basically the whole idea of truth is that there's no fate. Like, there's kind of freedom, and but where, like, there's two parts, right? There's real world, which is this world where there's machines and humans, and there's illusionary world which everybody lives in. And this illusionary world is predetermined by machines, and real world, like, there's humans who have their own will and who may just still fight against machines and, you know, do something. But for me, it's definitely like not the case, since I perceive it more like there's no real world of humans, and this is like real. This is what may be called the truth. That and this truth is liberating. So as soon as you know that there is no anything like self, and the whole world is predetermined, and you live in this world, it makes you. It gives you real freedom. So you basically become aware of what's really going on, since you are aware that you are not in control. That everything what's going on is just determined by some patterns, by your perception, by your brain, by neurons in your mind, and it makes life much more easier from the perspective that you stop thinking about future and the past in the same terms. So you don't think like, oh, I probably would have changed something if I had experience which I have right now back in the days. But here you don't have this thought. You think that everything what happened it just happened in the way as it should have happened. And yeah, it's for me it's liberating. So you know the truth, and you don't have negative emotions attached to your this mismatch between your perceptions and your thinking and the reality. So you in reality, it becomes just the one thing. And certainly, like I guess it's the only way to achieve what you call like happiness. And well, yeah.
David doesn't look convinced.
No, I'm just listening.
Well, I don't.
convinced,
Like you
but I
can
know
you
this is something Vladimir believes in.
you can't be happy unless you understand yourself and the world, and you have, you know, you like, I guess it's all about emotions, right? So happiness basically means that you don't have negative emotions. You are not angry, you are not frustrated, you are not hateful, whatever. But sometimes you need negative emotions to properly orient yourself in the world, but you are not attached to these emotions. So you may feel anger, but it doesn't make you, feel like, for example, what's the difference between hate and anger? Anger is just a relatively short period of, emotional burst, and hate is basically more kind of long term. So you basically hate somebody, and it's a permanent feeling. And anger is just, you need anger to solve certain problem, but then when the problem no longer is there, you just go on and you feel different emotions. And when you have this perception of the world, that everything what's going on, it's like you are not the one who decides what's going to happen next in the future. You are not the one who determines like the development of the world. It's just basically certain patterns, and you perceive it. The consciousness is more about perception rather than controlling. And when you understand that your consciousness is basically the way to interpret what's going on, you may see it like all reality as just, you may see more than people can than usually people can see, who can't who always are biased by their wishful thinking and by their their thoughts. They think about their thoughts and about what they think must happen as reality, and what's going on they think is just, they may change the real experience. But when you understand that what's going on, that's what's real. So what happened, this is real, and you're thinking about how it should happen, it's not real. It's just your whatever. Yeah, I understand. It's like I'm trying to develop some thoughts which it's basically kind of new thoughts. So whatever I'm saying right now, I'm trying to put my understanding in words, but I see it's very hard to describe all of this, since I'm still thinking a lot like in my Russian language, and I'm trying to just translate some other thoughts which I had when I was like reading some books or trying to make sense out of some perceptions and some ideas. It may sound
you're going back to your free will, tenets, your free will thinking.
Yeah, I see.
But
I'm sorry. I hope I'm not interrupting too much.
No, go ahead. I wasn't going to say anything.
Do you guys remember Henry Kissinger? Do you know who that is?
His great knowledge is not as good as yours.
Yeah. He was Secretary of State under Nixon, I think, and others. But he was originally from Germany, and he was in Germany, and he was being interviewed by a reporter in Germany. And the reporter asked him, "Is it okay if we speak in German?" And Henry said, "Yeah, but it would be the German of an 8th grader." So is that really what you want to do? Because he had been speaking English since he was in the 8th grade. And by the time he was in the 10th grade, he spoke English exclusively. And even though German was his native tongue, he learned so young how to speak English that he didn't feel comfortable, confident expressing complex ideas with an 8th grader's vocabulary. I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah, I remember I started studying English. The first time the idea came at 2011, and for the first 6 years, I basically was like studying from time to time. And I remember the moment 2017 in May when I started conducting this club, I started thinking in English, and I decided like to shift my language and like to think in English all the time. And for the first month, I've been thinking in English all the time, and I learned more than for like in my perception. It was as if I learned for this month, I learned more than I learned for these 5 years before. And then I started comparing like, wow, if I continue developing my language in the same way, like how is there any growth in my language every month? So it just gets better and better every month, or it stays at relatively the same level. So I perceive like it slows down, but still there's certain growth. I think I'm talking like a 4. Yeah, it's like your analogy is quite relevant here. So I'm talking like a 4-year-old boy. Like this is the language which I.
Come on,
If
you're
I
not talking
understand
like a
you,
4-year-old.
you're doing pretty damn good.
Yeah, but
Agreed. Your English
yeah,
is wonderful.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I'm aware that I need like 10 or maybe 15 more years just to learn like grown up. I mean, to shift my mind and make it like I actually don't think that this idea of native language is kind of silly for me. So it's you may basically now you may change any language and like become a native in every language, but probably I will not be able to have the same accent as native people. But it's not the point. The point is like what is native? Like the first language which you learn, it's native language. Like, but why? If you may learn another language and think in this language all the time, why this language can be native? I mean, the whole idea of native language is very problematic for me. I think if I would have kids, for example, I'll probably try to teach them like 2-3 languages, like to speak from the very beginning, and get rid of this idea that there's only one native language.
That's what I'm trying to do with my daughter, but it's I'm kind of like failing so far because I just end up speaking to her in English mostly, and yeah, I need to develop some sort of method, but because I would like her to speak 3 different. I like her to speak Spanish and French as well, which I perceive as the most relevant languages in the West, other than English. I mean, because that would basically she wouldn't have to learn them later in life. It would be a head start. But like the idea of fate, that is also part of the Matrix, right? I mean, that's one of the central questions or central issues of the trilogy is if there is such a thing as fate and everything is already predetermined, or if we can actually affect the outcome of events and we can actually be free in that sense.
Yeah, I would distinguish fate from determinism, since fate is like, it sounds more, it's predetermined and there's it's already prescribed, it's written. Whereas determinism is more like about causes and effects. So what's going on? It's like you don't know what's going to happen next, and nobody knows what's going to happen next. But it's going to happen exactly in the way how it must happen. There's no possibility for you to change it, so to make it different. And this determinism and fate is basically it's already known, and it's going to be only like, well, again, it's hard to distinguish. Now I see that it's also it's how you draw the line between. It's not like real fate. There's real distinction between fate and determinism. But I guess fate is more like pessimistic, whereas determinism is natural.
No, I don't think so. I don't think fate is pessimistic. I think it could be either way. In fact, the Oracle is sort of it's enigmatic figure throughout the movies, but she's also kind of like perceived in a bad way and also in a good way, depending on how you look at it. But mostly in a good way. I would say mostly in a good way. She's like a sympathetic figure. It's just that he's uncomfortable with the idea that whatever he does is already written, or he cannot escape whatever it is that he's going to do. You know, like
Yeah.
when a really good scene in that movie is like the vase scene. I don't know if you guys remember that scene, but he's going. I think that's the first time that he meets the Oracle. It's in the first movie, and he goes into the room, and she says, "Don't worry about the vase." And he asks, "What do you mean about the vase?" And then he knocks down the vase, and the vase falls into the ground and breaks. She said it before it happened, and he actually had to do something in order to break the vase, right? But did he break the vase because it was just something that was going to happen, or did he break the vase because she said something about it? It's a very it messes with your brain, it messes with your mind. But this is what this idea of determinism sort of is.
Yeah, but fatalism is more about it. There's somebody who knows the fate, right? So it's like it's kind of tool to manipulate, create ideologies, whatever. Whereas determinism, it's basically we understand that there is no such thing as free will, and it doesn't mean exactly that there is something or somebody who knows what's going to happen. It's more about like everything has a cause, and everything was going on exactly in this way, because there's basically no way to get back and change. Like you can just go back in time and change one thing, and you have to change everything. But to change everything, it's basically that's what's really going on. Like reality just changes itself. Everything, every next step, every next moment is just. But it's transformation of reality according to previously established condition, or whatever you call it.
So, David, do you remember the Ray Bradbury short story called The Sound of Thunder by any chance?
Vaguely.
Vaguely. That's the one where the guys, they have a time machine and they send them back as big game hunters into the past, and they go back to hunt dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah.
And while they're there, they have very strict instructions. There's this concrete path that they can walk through as they tour, and they are told very strict, never step off the path. And one guy does. And
there was
he steps on and kills a
Yeah.
dragonfly. And the act of him killing that dragonfly 65 million years in the past completely changes the future. And right, that's what's known to chaos theorists as the butterfly effect, where complex systems are very sensitive to changes in their initial conditions. And if you make a minor change in something, it can have very drastic effects down the road. And that's the universe that I believe in. The one that I believe in is very, very complex, has a lot of things going on all at the same time, and has a certain degree of randomness that interacts with the deterministic portions of it. And which is why I do not believe in strict determinism, nor do I believe in fate. I do think it is possible to predict and or forecast the future, but only under very, very rigid conditions is that possible. And I know because I've done it under very rigid conditions. But my world, I think, has a lot more probabilistic nature to it than probably any of yours, I'm guessing. Actually, I think there's a great deal of probability going on. And what happens with probabilities is when you like you have dice, if you roll the dice a lot of times, they show certain trends. Well, probabilities in general, if they are highly repetitive, they show certain trends. But when you combine them with a chaotic model of the system, when a particular probability hits a particular value, which is rare, and that's what they call black swan events in statistics, it can drastically change what the future is. So I don't really think anything's determined.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more about perception. So you like this idea of determinism. It basically gives you a different way of perception. And like, do you have some thoughts about the past which kind of bothering you, which you think, oh, probably I would have changed? Like if I changed something in the past, I'll have some different outcomes in the future. I guess many people like suffer from these thoughts, and when you kind of believe in determinism, basically you don't have any sense of regret, since you understand that if something happened, there was a reason, and you basically try to understand what was the reason. But it doesn't mean that you don't have this probabilistic, of course, future. It feels that it may be different, and it feels as if you have different choices. And even if you don't have, it doesn't actually matter. It's still, you perceive the world as if you always make decisions, and these decisions lead to certain outcomes. But I guess it's more subtle in terms of like when you think about determinism, it's more subtle, since you don't ask the question, do you make choices? But you ask the question, like, what is the nature of self? Like, is this self, it's something that I can understand and say exactly this is the thing, or it's more kind of linguistic thing, more like a feature of grammar, whatever. So I don't know what is the self. I know that there's the body. I may control this body. I have direct control over its. I may do something with this body. But what exactly I call I? Like, do I call the whole body, or do I call it's like my brain, or it's just a part in my brain, or it's soul? I don't really know. And it seems like the environment affects me, like my decisions, the way how I perceive the world, very much. And there's certain inner kind of perception or inner feeling of there's self. This is some language, or maybe it's some metaphysical thing which I don't understand what it is, but something that I may give commands to this body, something that I may say, okay, now I need to say a word, or now I need to be silent, or now I need to stand up. And this sense of self, this is like, when you think about determinism, this is an illusion, since you say like there's no such thing which actually gives commands. It's just natural organization of the whole structure of the world. And but it's like the future may be different, and nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. But what means different? It's like different from how you anticipate it, or different from how I don't even know how to describe it. But for me, it's like the whole everything what happened to the past determines the future. And I don't see like what exactly meant by like, okay, probability. I may say like 5 different words, but I know exactly that after I said one of these 5 words, there was no way, if we get back and I need to say like everything is the same, I need to say one of these 5 words, I will say the same word unless I can change something. But I can't change anything in the past. I don't have time machine as in this movie or a book by Red Bradbury, and get back and make touch the dragonfly. I know that there's at least it seems that there's no way. And if there is a way, it's the development of the same. I mean, it's also predetermined that I create a time machine, and then I get back and I change the past, and it's still the same past. I mean, it's very, very, very complex topic. And I guess you may argue, like with determinism, you may say that, it's hard to prove whether or not it's true, but there's some skepticism when you say that nothing is true at all, and any kind of knowledge, or agnosticism, any kind of knowledge is impossible. And from this point, I think it's valid to consider like whether or not determinism makes any sense. But from point of free choices and discovering the future, like what's going on in the future, about changes in the future, I think it's almost like it's almost impossible to say something meaningful about the future when you like make this probabilistic.
I mean,
I
that's
guess,
what statisticians do for a living, is they make short-term and sometimes longer term they make forecasts. They don't make predictions, they make forecasts about what the future is going to be. And there's a big difference, right? We don't predict the weather, we forecast the weather, which means that there's a really good chance that it will come out quite a bit different than we think it will. But with the knowledge we have right now, this is what we think. This is how we think it will go.
yeah, but I guess our predictions, like in terms of weather, our predictions doesn't make any difference whether or not weather is going to change, right? I mean, when we forecast the weather, it doesn't affect the
No,
weather.
it's just a forecast, it's just a prediction. So
Whereas if you say like, don't touch the vase, or the vase is going to be broken. I mean,
yeah,
this prediction actually
it could be. Yeah,
affects.
there is such a thing as a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what they call it, and
Yeah.
it's because you predict it, because you're making the prophecy. That's why the prophecy comes true. Actually, the stock market recently has lots of not just the stock market, but the crypto market as well. The financial markets have been full of self-fulfilling prophecies of late, because people, now with social media, people get together and there's so many people that believe that something is going to happen that they make it happen, or either that or Elon Musk saying something. So there's lots of self-fulfilling prophecies. Just this week, lost a bunch of money because of a self-fulfilling
At
prophecy.
some point, people will realize the whole cryptocurrency thing is basically a gigantic Ponzi scheme, and realize that unless you got it, or basic H salesman or whatever they used to peddle, and unless you were one of the first people who got in the pyramid when things were simple, you're gonna lose. That's the nature of those kinds of schemes, and that's precisely what this is, which is why I never touched it. And I'm very happy to say that I never touched it.
And you should short it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you're right or not. I wish I could say if you're right or not, because that would save me a whole lot of headaches. But certainly it didn't
They're
work
headaches
out.
of your own making.
Yes,
Remember
but it's certainly, it wasn't so pretty this week. But those are self-fulfilling prophecies, and the vase might have been a self-fulfilling prophecy. The movie, it's not very clear about that, and it makes you think, it makes you wonder if it's sometimes it's hard to say. In these cases, it's pretty, like these financial market cases, I mean, it's pretty easy to say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but sometimes it's not so clear in a bunch of different circumstances. Anyways, it's 9:15, so maybe we can finish. Any last points that you guys wanna touch before we're done?
Yeah, so I feel like we didn't go a whole lot into
Superheroes.
or maybe, but like the question is knowing more about reality, like, deprive us from happiness. I think that's an interesting question. I think there's I think there's two ways to view that question. I think there's one is when you know all the bad that happens in the world, it's like you don't want to hear it. It's like ignorance is bliss on that. And the other is scientific advancement. So some people have argued that like all this scientific progress like sucks the life out of the world, which I don't totally agree with. I think there's some stuff to think about there, but like I think I wanted to go into, so I think it was Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. They said, like, if you read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, they said that like 5 pages of that is more fascinating than the entire Bible. So that was like one of the arguments for why science does not suck the life out of all these myths and narratives we're told, is because it creates a new story that's even more amazing than the old story. And I think there is a lot to that. But then at the same time, a lot of people argue that, science has sort of, the more we study science, the more it seems that the universe is indifferent to humanity. And that kind of has a little bit of a cold feeling to it, because there's no morals, there's nothing special about human beings other than we're just simply more complex than other animals. And so it kind of has a very cold and different feeling to it. And so those are kind of the two perspectives on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's you could talk about this question in a number of different ways, right? One of those ways is the way that you just brought up, which is, I think, an interesting way, which is like science versus religion outlook, scientific or religious outlook. And in this case, we're assuming the scientific outlook is the red pill and the religious outlook is the blue pill. But I disagree with you, Michael, actually. I will still take the red pill, but I think the red pill sucks. I don't think it's a nice, like, as interesting as the books by
Stephen
all
Hawking.
Okay, yeah, all these different scientists, but certainly Stephen Hawking writes interesting books, but it doesn't really matter. Like the well, I guess it could matter if that's your perspective, but my perspective is that at least from a religious perspective, people's lives had a lot more meaning, and when you look at it from a scientific outlook, it's really hard to find meaning. And some people say they do, but I mean, it's, for me at least, like, we're essentially just monkeys that are gonna die, and that's it. The universe doesn't really care. Like you said, it's like a really cold vision of the universe, but that's what it is, and that's, to me, I mean, it's way more harsh to think about life that way than to think about life as, if you're a good man, you will go to heaven, and all of it will make sense in the end. You're going to live a good life throughout eternity. It's better than to think, well, you're going to live 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 years at most, and then it's going to be over. People are going to forget you, and
So I never
Nothing's
actually
gonna
said
matter.
which side I never actually said which side I was on of that. I just presented both sides. But
well, you're
I-
on the scientific side, I'm sure, because you're a mathematician. But
not necessarily, no. So I think there's I think it's worth studying science, but I think there's still a lot of value in like learning from the myths and narratives of the past. So yeah.
I
guess
would
that's kind of my view.
I would add that for me, for example, this dichotomy between religion and science makes very little sense. And well, some degree science is less dogmatic than religion, but they both very dogmatic. And I perceive the world like an infinite, like whatever we call it, consciousness or experience. And I think, like, when you study, the whole idea is that you never stop studying. So you never came to the point when you may say, oh, now I know what's going on. Now this is the final point. And the problem with the religion, basically, they tell you there's God and there's nothing to think about. So this is the final point. And in science, they also say there's laws of nature. This is the truth about these laws, and you can do anything with these laws. But and you must know all of them, and and that's probably the meaning of, like, they are meaningless, but still, like, studying these laws, it's basically gives you a certain meaning. Like, you have to do something, and it makes sense for you. But once again, it's like, when you study all these laws, what are you going to do next? Like, are you going to just teach some other people, or you are going to discover something new and continue like this discovery of the universe? Like, for me, as I said, it's infinite, and there's no way to get to the point when you can say I know everything. But this experience of studying, it makes it's actually what gives happiness. And in this case, I can say that ignorance is bliss, since when you are ignorant, you basically you stop growing in this like intellectual way. So you say, okay, now this is the this is certain thing which I know, and there's no need to know more. And like from my perspective, it's like there's always something more that you may know, that you may study, and that's what I'm actually doing in my life. So I'm just basically studying all the time, whatever just appears on my intellectual horizon, and I just always try to expand it as far as I
I'm
can.
kind of with Vladimir here. I am going to learn as much as I can for as long as I can. And when I stop learning, that's what a good definition of being dead is to me. So when I stop learning, it's because I've croaked. And otherwise, I'll probably die with a book in my hand. I hope I die with a book in my hand. Either that or eaten by a bear. Those are my two things.
Eaten by a bear doesn't sound all that nice.
But it's a very naturalistic thing, and the one of the things that I'm studying is I found out in Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, there is a Druid grove, and the Reformed Druids have a major presence in Minnesota. And I've become kind of interested in that because there are things about the naturalistic outlook of the Druids versus a lot of other what one might call spiritual sects that appeals to me, because I'm basically a naturalistic kind of guy.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today. Thanks for listening, guys, and hope you enjoyed the discussion. We'll be back again next Friday